The text came in at 6:47 a.m. as I sat on a sunlit balcony in Hilton Head Island, watching my mother laugh, a sound I hadn't heard in 21 years. It was the kind of laugh that seemed foreign now, as if it belonged to someone else. My brother had made her laugh, and for a moment, I almost forgot about the ache I had carried for so long. But that 7-word message, "Fly home, don't say anything to your mother and brother," froze the moment. My stomach dropped, and a sense of cold dread washed over me. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Now hit that like button if you enjoy stories. And let me tell you how this all started, because sometimes the best revenge is just letting people reveal exactly who they really are. 12 hours later, I stood in the arrivals hall of Hartford Bradley Airport, feeling disoriented and lost. A man in a gray suit held a sign with my name, his expression unreadable. Beside him stood 2 police officers. I was taken to a small conference room where something unfolded that I'm still trying to process. I don't remember hitting the floor, but I do remember waking up to the harsh glare of fluorescent lights and a paramedic calmly asking me to count backward from 10. That was 4 months ago. The effects of that day still haunt me. Long nights where sleep eludes me, my mind replaying fragments of a family I thought I knew. But I owe it to myself and to you to share what I've learned, because the truth of what my family did to me has changed everything. My name is Willow Frell, and this is my story, the story of how my own mother and brother tried to destroy me, and how the truth ultimately saved my life. Let me take you back to a rainy Tuesday night in November. It was the kind of night where the world seemed muffled, weighed down by the relentless rain. I was only 11 years old, standing on the threshold of a reality I never saw coming. I remember that night vividly, not just because of what happened, but because of something so simple, so ordinary. I came home from school with a permission slip in my hand, needing just a signature from my mom and $3 for a field trip. That's all I needed, a signature and $3. It should have been so easy. But when I walked into the kitchen, I found my mother sitting at the table, the phone pressed to her ear. Her voice was flat, almost robotic. "It's done," she said, her words emotionless. "She's leaving tonight." I didn't know who she was talking to, and I still don't. She hung up, turned to me, and looked at me with the kind of indifference you'd reserve for something as insignificant as a stain on the counter. "Pack your things," she said. I thought she meant the field trip. I smiled, relieved that it was nothing more than that. But then she opened the front door. The rain was pouring down, and she handed me a black garbage bag, the kind you use for yard waste. And then, with a coldness I can't forget, she said, "Go, don't come back." It didn't make sense. No suitcase, no coat, no explanation, just a garbage bag. My sneakers filled with water almost immediately, and by the second block I felt the chill seep through my bones. The bag tore on Hebron Avenue, and my library book fell into a puddle, but I kept walking, 3 miles in the rain. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to go. I made it to my grandfather's house by 9 p.m. When he opened the door, there was no questioning, no asking what happened. He didn't call my mom. He didn't call anyone. Instead, he knelt on the wet porch, wrapped his arms around me, and said, "You're home now, little bird." That was the last time anyone in my family held me. For the next 7 years, that small house on Hubbard Street was the only place I felt real. My grandfather never called Margaret. He never mentioned my mother or brother. He didn't force me to talk about it, but there were moments when he said things that didn't make sense until much later. One day, when I was 13, I was crying in the garage. A girl at school had asked why my mom wasn't at the parent conference, and I just couldn't take it anymore. Grandpa set down his wrench and said, "Someday you'll understand why I'm saving the best for you." I didn't know it then, but those words would stick with me for years. It was almost as if he knew, even then, what was coming. As the years passed, I began to notice small, strange things, like the man in the gray suit who would visit my grandfather every few months. They'd sit in the study, and I'd hear their low voices behind closed doors. When I asked, Grandpa would say, "An old friend helping with paperwork." I never pushed him to explain, but a part of me started wondering. Little did I know those small details would become the key to unlocking a truth I had no idea was hidden. Stay tuned for the next part, where I uncover secrets that had been buried for years. The mystery behind those visits and my grandfather's cryptic words will change everything. The years that followed Grandpa's passing felt quiet, almost too quiet. Grandpa had been my anchor, and when he passed away, it felt like the last solid thing I had in my life had been pulled away. His death wasn't unexpected. He was elderly, and the stroke that took my grandmother's life had left him frail. But when he went, it wasn't just the house that grew still, it was me. Grandpa's house on Hubbard Street had always been my haven. It was a place where I could breathe without fear, without the constant worry that someone would come looking for me. It wasn't grand or flashy, just a small Cape Cod with a vegetable garden out back and a workshop in the garage where Grandpa fixed old clocks and radios. There was something in the simplicity of it that made me feel real, made me feel like I had a place in this world. But as peaceful as those years were, there were moments when I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. Every few months, the man in the gray suit would visit. I'd hear the low murmur of their conversations behind the closed door of Grandpa's study, but I never heard a full sentence. I was always careful not to pry. After all, I was a child then, trying to survive, trying to feel safe. But even then, something about the way Grandpa always spoke of the man, an old friend helping with paperwork, sounded too rehearsed. Why was he always there? What was he doing with Grandpa? And why didn't he ever want to be seen by me? Even now, looking back, I wonder if I should have asked more questions. But at the time, I had my own questions to answer. Where had my mother gone? Why hadn't she ever called? Why hadn't anyone in my family come for me after I'd been abandoned on that rainy night at 11 years old? Grandpa didn't push me to talk about it. He never forced me to ask those questions, but his silence spoke volumes. He knew something I didn't, and maybe, just maybe, he was keeping that something hidden from me for my own good. By the time I turned 18, I was ready to leave for college. Grandpa had made sure I got there. He had proofread my college essays, driven me to campus tours, and been the steady presence I so desperately needed. But with his passing, I was back at square one, alone. The only family I had was the one I had left behind. I didn't want to go back, but it seemed like the universe was pushing me toward them. And that's when I saw her again. The funeral was small, just a handful of neighbors, the pastor from the church, and a couple of familiar faces. But one of those faces was someone I hadn't seen in 7 years, my mother. She walked into the church with the same practiced grace, wearing black from head to toe, a silver cross around her neck, and a tissue in her hand. But it wasn't just her appearance that struck me, it was the way she held herself, cold, detached. She didn't look at me once, not even a glance. But my brother Dean did, and the words he spoke to me that day would set everything in motion. There's something you need to know, something about my brother that changed everything I thought I knew about family. Stay tuned for the next part where the man in the gray suit and the secrets he holds will come to light, and I'll learn that there's more at stake than I ever imagined. The funeral was quiet, too quiet. It felt like the kind of silence that swallows you whole, leaving you isolated in the midst of a crowd. The church was small, filled with the familiar faces of neighbors, a couple of old friends, and the pastor who'd known Grandpa for years. But there was one face I hadn't seen in 7 years, my mother. She walked into the church with the same practiced grace that had always defined her, black dress, silver cross around her neck, and a tissue in her hand. It was as if she had rehearsed her entrance, each movement deliberate, calculated. Her eyes were watery but distant, as though she were looking at a stranger instead of her own daughter. I couldn't help but notice how much she had aged, how time had stripped away the facade she'd so carefully crafted. She didn't look at me, not once, and for a moment I wondered if she even recognized me, or if I had become just another shadow from her past. I felt a cold wave wash over me, the weight of everything unsaid between us crashing down. But it wasn't the silence that hurt the most, it was the indifference. I was nothing to her, just a broken piece of the past that she had long since discarded. And then there was Dean. He stood at the front of the church, his back straight, his expression unreadable. I hadn't seen him in years, and yet there he was, just as distant as ever. When he approached me, I braced myself for something, anything, a hug, an apology, but all I got was a cold, calculated statement. "Grandpa left everything to Mom," he said, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "There's nothing for you." His words hit harder than any physical blow could have. I stood there, stunned, the weight of the truth settling into my bones. Grandpa, the man who had saved me, the man who had taken me in when no one else would, he had left everything to her. My mother, the woman who had cast me out, who had never once tried to reach out to me, had won. Dean's face remained impassive as he turned and walked away, as if the revelation he'd just dropped didn't matter. But it did. It mattered more than anything. For the first time, I realized that my brother wasn't just indifferent. He was complicit. He was as much a part of the manipulation as she was. I stood frozen in the pew, my mind racing to process everything. Grandpa's legacy had been stolen from me, and I had no idea how to fight back. But I wasn't going to let it end there. As the service concluded and people began to file out, I felt a shift in the air. I turned to find the man in the gray suit standing near the door, his gaze fixed on me. The same man who had visited Grandpa so many times before. His eyes followed my every move, and though he said nothing, I could feel the weight of his presence. There was something unsettling about him, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. And as I watched him, I couldn't shake the feeling that he knew more than he was letting on, about me, about my family, about the secrets that had been buried for so long. He hadn't been a part of my life for years, but I knew this wasn't the last time I'd see him. His presence at Grandpa's funeral was no coincidence. Just when I thought I couldn't feel more betrayed by my family, the man in the gray suit approached me. His expression remained stoic, but there was a quiet intensity in his gaze. He knew something, something about my family, something about me. And when he spoke, everything I thought I knew about my family would be thrown into chaos. The secrets he held were darker than I could have imagined. Stay tuned for the next part, where the man in the gray suit will reveal the truth behind my family's lies and the shocking role they played in trying to tear me apart. I could feel the weight of the man in the gray suit's gaze even before he moved. It was like he knew something I didn't, something about my family and the secrets they'd buried. The tension in the air was thick, and as the funeral procession started to wind down, I couldn't shake the feeling that my mother's manipulations weren't the only dark things lingering in this town. When he finally approached me, he didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, his expression neutral, but his eyes, those eyes, were locked onto mine, measuring me in a way that made my skin crawl. He was no stranger to me. I'd seen him countless times growing up, always in Grandpa's study, always just out of sight, always just out of reach. And now, here he was, standing in front of me as though he'd been waiting for this moment. His voice was calm but firm when he spoke. "Miss Frell," he began, "I think we need to talk." I stared at him, unsure of what to say. Every part of me screamed to turn away, to ignore the man who had been a silent figure in my life for so long. But something told me this wasn't the time to ignore him. The things he knew could change everything. I was your grandfather's attorney, he continued, his eyes still unwavering. For 30 years. I've been trying to get this to you for a long time. Your grandfather wanted you to have the truth, and now I'm here to give it to you. My heart skipped a beat. My grandfather? The truth? What are you talking about? I managed to ask, my voice trembling despite my efforts to keep it steady. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his briefcase, pulling out a manila folder, and set it down on the table between us. The weight of it seemed symbolic, as if everything about my past, everything I'd been running from, was contained within that single folder. I have something for you, he said quietly, something your grandfather asked me to deliver when the time was right. I felt a chill run through me. The man in the gray suit wasn't just some distant figure anymore. He was tied to everything I had ever known about my family, and everything I had never understood. As I sat across from the man, my mind raced with a million questions, each more urgent than the last. What truth was my grandfather hiding? What role had this man played in my family's tangled web of lies? And why was I only hearing about all of this now? But the moment that would change everything didn't come in the form of a gentle revelation. No, the truth came at me like a freight train. The man in the gray suit slid the folder open, revealing a series of documents, and then he said the words I would never forget. You've been part of a much bigger game than you realize, Miss Frell, and your family has been playing it for years. Stay tuned for the next part where the bombshells keep dropping and I find myself caught in a game of manipulation, secrets, and betrayal that I never signed up for. As I stared at the man in the gray suit, my heart pounded in my chest. His words echoed in my ears, each one like a hammer strike, shattering everything I thought I knew about my family. A bigger game. What did that mean? How could my family have been playing some kind of game without me even knowing? The folder in front of me felt like it weighed a ton, but I couldn't bring myself to open it. What if the truth inside was too much to handle? What if everything I had ever believed about my family was a lie? You're not going to like what's in there, the man said, breaking through my thoughts. But it's time you knew. You need to see what they've been hiding. I swallowed hard, my throat dry as I reached for the folder. The man's words hung in the air, like a warning I couldn't ignore. I carefully flipped the pages, each one seeming to pull me deeper into a past I wasn't ready to face. The first document I saw was a letter, typed neatly, but the words were sharp and cold. It was from my mother. In it, she talked about control, about maintaining the family's power, but the most chilling part was the mention of my grandfather. She spoke about him as if he were a pawn in her game, someone to be manipulated, someone to be kept in line. I felt my breath catch in my throat as I read on. The letter outlined a series of plans, all designed to secure my mother's position in the family's wealth, and ultimately her control over me. But it wasn't just about money, it was about something far darker, a pattern of emotional manipulation that stretched back years, even before I was born. I looked up at the man, my heart racing. "What does this mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Your family has been playing you for years," he replied, his voice grim. "Your mother and brother, they've been manipulating you for control of the inheritance, of the family legacy, of you." I felt a wave of nausea rise in my chest as I tried to process the words. I had always known something was wrong. The constant sense of abandonment, the manipulations from my mother, the way Dean had treated me over the years, it all started to make sense. But this was something else. This was bigger than I had ever imagined. The man in the gray suit had just opened the floodgates, and I found myself drowning in the truth of my family's betrayal. But that was just the beginning. The deeper I dug, the more I realized that the man wasn't just an outsider. He was a part of something far more sinister than I could have ever imagined. Stay tuned for the next part where I uncover more secrets from my family's past, and the man in the gray suit reveals the final piece of the puzzle that will change everything I thought I knew about my life. The weight of the letter in my hands felt unbearable. I had always known that my mother and brother weren't exactly loving or kind, But the cold, calculated manipulation I was reading was beyond anything I had ever imagined. My hands shook as I turned the next page, desperate to understand what kind of game my family had been playing. The man in the gray suit sat silently across from me, watching my every movement. I had so many questions, but I couldn't bring myself to ask him. How could I? The truth was unfolding before me, and with each word, I realized just how much of my life had been a lie. The next document was a series of financial statements, all meticulously organized. But it wasn't the numbers that caught my attention. It was the notes in the margins, written in my mother's hand. She had been orchestrating everything, the inheritance, the control, and all of it had been about power. The financial papers detailed a trust fund that had been set up for me after my grandfather's death, but the conditions were shocking. The money was being held until I proved myself worthy by complying with the family's demands. The documents outlined everything from the house I had inherited to my grandfather's savings, each part of his legacy being controlled by her until I met her standards. And what were those standards? Complete submission to her will. No independence, no choice. I slammed the papers down onto the table, my breath coming in shallow bursts. My mind was spinning. She made it all conditional. I didn't even have a say in my own future. Your family has been playing the long game, Willow, the man in the gray suit said, his voice steady, though there was a hint of something, regret maybe, behind his words. Your mother knew she could control you through your inheritance, through your connection to your grandfather. But it's not just money, it's about control. She's been grooming you to believe that you were powerless, that you needed her to survive. I felt my chest tighten. The memories of my mother's manipulations flooded back, the subtle guilt trips, the emotional blackmail, the constant sense of being judged and found wanting. Every part of me had been shaped by her control. Every decision, every success, even every failure had been influenced by her presence. I had never been free. The truth hit me like a physical blow. I've never been free, I whispered to myself, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. The man leaned forward, his eyes narrowing slightly. That's the point of it all. She kept you close, kept you under her thumb, and used the inheritance as a way to ensure you never broke away. You've always been more than just an heir to her. You've been a pawn. But now you can make your own move. I couldn't breathe. It was like the walls of my life were closing in, everything I thought I knew about my family collapsing around me. My mother and brother were part of a system that had kept me small, kept me quiet, kept me contained, and now I had the power to fight back. But where did I start? I couldn't sit there any longer. The floodgates had opened, and I needed answers. But there was something more that the man in the gray suit had to tell me, something that, once I heard it, would change everything. The truth had already shattered my world, but what he was about to reveal could be the final piece of the puzzle, the piece that would either set me free or destroy everything I had left. Stay tuned for the next part where the full extent of my family's betrayal is exposed, and I learn just how far they were willing to go to keep me in line. The final revelation is just around the corner. The documents in front of me had already shattered everything I thought I knew about my family. Each word I read felt like a blow to my soul, each page revealing the true depths of my mother's manipulations. I had always known there were things I didn't understand, but this was something darker than I could ever have imagined. The man in the gray suit sat across from me, his eyes unwavering as I struggled to process the truth. The folder between us felt heavier with every passing second. He had just given me the key to unraveling the lies that had haunted me for years, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more. Something even worse waiting to be uncovered. "There's more," he said, his voice calm, almost detached. He pushed another envelope toward me, the seal unbroken. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. What could be worse than this? What other secrets had they buried in the darkness? I didn't want to open it. I didn't want to face any more lies, any more manipulation, but I knew I had no choice. The truth had already torn my life apart. If I stopped now, I would be living in ignorance, forever haunted by what I might not know. I had to face it. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, much like the others, but this one was different. It wasn't from my mother. It wasn't from anyone in my family. It was from someone I had never heard of, someone who had been watching me for years. The letter, written in elegant but hurried handwriting, began with a simple statement: "What you are about to learn will change everything." I turned the page. The letter went on to describe a hidden agreement between my mother, my grandfather, and a business partner, an agreement that would have devastating consequences for me if I didn't act quickly. The man in the gray suit, it seemed, was more than just an attorney. He had been part of the plan, but not as an ally. No, his role was far more complicated than I could have guessed. He had been tasked with ensuring that I would never escape the clutches of my family's control. He had been the one to oversee the trust, the one who made sure that no matter what, I stayed under their thumb. But now, with my grandfather gone and my mother having failed to keep me in line, the plan had fallen apart. "There's more," he said, his voice calm, almost detached. He pushed another envelope toward me, the seal unbroken. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. What could be worse than this? What other secrets had they buried in the darkness? I didn't want to open it. I didn't want to face any more lies, any more manipulation, but I knew I had no choice. The truth had already torn my life apart. If I stopped now, I would be living in ignorance, forever haunted by what I might not know. I had to face it. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, much like the others, but this one was different. It wasn't from my mother. It wasn't from anyone in my family. It was from someone I had never heard of, someone who had been watching me for years. The letter, written in elegant but hurried handwriting, began with a simple statement: "What you are about to learn will change everything." I turned the page. The letter went on to describe a hidden agreement between my mother, my grandfather, and a business partner, an agreement that would have devastating consequences for me if I didn't act quickly. The man in the gray suit, it seemed, was more than just an attorney. He had been part of the plan, but not as an ally. No, his role was far more complicated than I could have guessed. He had been tasked with ensuring that I would never escape the clutches of my family's control. He had been the one to oversee the trust, the one who made sure that no matter what, I stayed under their thumb. But now, with my grandfather gone and my mother having failed to keep me in line, the plan had fallen apart. "Your mother isn't the only one who has been manipulating you, Miss Frell," said the man in the gray suit, his voice low. "I had my part to play, but I'm done being a pawn." The words hit me like a freight train. I felt the blood drain from my face as the weight of his confession sank in. He had been just as much a part of my family's deception as anyone else. He had watched as they shaped my life, used me, controlled me, and now he was offering me the final piece of the puzzle. "I've been waiting for you to reach this point, Miss Frell. You see, Miss Frell, this wasn't just about your inheritance. It was about control, over you, over the future. Your family had a plan, but I've been keeping something from them, something that could change everything." I felt my breath catch in my throat. What could possibly be worse than what I had already learned? What else had this man been hiding from me? The man in the gray suit leaned forward, his expression changing for the first time. "You've been playing their game for too long, Miss Frell, but the truth is, they never expected you to break free." Stay tuned for the next part, where I finally learn the final, most shocking truth about my family and how the man in the gray suit's confession will set the stage for everything to change. The room felt suffocating as I sat there, trying to process the flood of revelations. My head was spinning, my hands still trembling from the letter and the man's confession. Everything I had known, everything I had believed about my family had been twisted into something unrecognizable. But the most chilling part was the realization that the man in the gray suit was no longer an outsider. He had been part of it all, manipulating me, guiding me down a path I didn't even know existed. "You've been playing their game for too long, Miss Frell," he said, his voice breaking through my thoughts. "But the truth is, they never expected you to break free." Break free? Could I even do that? My entire life had been built on the lies they told me. Everything I had worked for, everything I had achieved was tainted by their control. I had been nothing more than a pawn in their game. But now, there was a chance to reclaim what was mine. There was a chance to take back my life, to stop being a player in their game and become the one who controlled the moves. I stood up, the weight of everything I had learned crashing down on me. "What is it that you've been keeping from them?" I asked, my voice shaking with a mixture of anger and determination. "What have you been hiding?" The man in the gray suit didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at me for a long moment, as if deciding how much to reveal. Finally, he spoke. "I've been keeping something from your mother, something she doesn't know about your grandfather's will," he said, his eyes narrowing. "There's a clause in it that she never expected, one that gives you complete control over your inheritance, your future. She thought she had everything locked up, but she didn't account for this." I froze. Control? What did that mean? My grandfather had left me something? Something more than just money? "Your grandfather left you a stipulation," the man continued, his voice low. "He knew what was happening. He knew what your mother was trying to do, and he didn't want you to be another pawn in her game. He put this clause in place to ensure you'd have a choice, to protect you when the time came." My heart raced. This was it, the final piece of the puzzle. I wasn't as powerless as I thought. My grandfather had left me a way out. "What do I need to do?" I asked, the words coming out of my mouth almost before I could process them. The man stood, walking to a nearby drawer and pulling out another envelope. "This is the key to everything," he said, handing it to me. "You sign this and your future is yours. You'll be free. The trust, the inheritance, everything. It will be yours to control." I took the envelope, my hands shaking. The final decision was in my hands now. The choice was mine. For the first time in my life, I had control. I walked out of that room, the weight of the past still on my shoulders, but a new sense of purpose in my heart. The man in the gray suit had shown me the truth, but now it was up to me to decide what came next. The family that had kept me locked in their game could no longer control me. I was free. Stay tuned for the final part of Willow's journey, where she takes back control, faces her mother's betrayal head-on, and finally makes the choices that will define the rest of her life. The streets felt different as I walked away from the man in the gray suit's office. My footsteps echoed in the silence of the city, but inside, I felt a sense of clarity I had never known before. I held the envelope tightly in my hand, the weight of it no longer a burden but a beacon of the freedom I had spent so long searching for. I had the choice now. For so long, I had been at the mercy of my mother, my brother, and their manipulations. They had controlled my future, my inheritance, my every move. But not anymore. Now, I had the power to rewrite my story. I reached my mother's house with a heart that had finally found its rhythm. The familiar, sterile walls of the place that had once held so many painful memories didn't scare me anymore. The games they had played were over. The secrets, the lies, all of it was laid bare before me. It was time to face the woman who had tried to break me, to confront the reality of what she had done to me and to everyone around her. I rang the doorbell, feeling the weight of the past heavy on my chest, but this time I wasn't afraid. This time, I was the one who had the power. I was the one who would decide what came next. When she opened the door, I could see the surprise in her eyes. She wasn't expecting me, not after everything that had happened. But I wasn't here to seek her approval. I wasn't here to apologize or beg for anything. I was here to take what was mine. "I'm taking control of my life and everything that comes with it," I said, my voice steady, unwavering. "The inheritance, the trust, everything you tried to control, it's mine now." Her face hardened, but there was a flicker of something behind her eyes. Fear. She had always held the reins, thinking she could bend me to her will, but now she knew I wasn't that person anymore. I wasn't the daughter she could manipulate. "You can't just take it from me," she said, her voice shaking with a mix of anger and desperation. "I already have," I replied, stepping past her and into the house, "and I'm done being your pawn." Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't stop me. For the first time in my life, I realized she couldn't stop me. I had the power now. The man in the gray suit had shown me the way. He had given me the key to unlocking the final chapter of my life. My grandfather's claws had protected me when I didn't even know I needed protection. But it wasn't just the inheritance or the wealth that mattered anymore. It was the knowledge that I was free. Free from the lies, free from the manipulation, free from the chains they had put around me. I turned back to face her, my heart steady in my chest. "You've lost, and I've won." I walked out of that house, no longer burdened by the past. The family that had held me captive in their game of power and control no longer had a hold on me. The inheritance was mine, yes, but so was my life, and I was ready to live it on my terms. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. I was no longer playing their game. I was writing my own rules now. As I stood there, looking out at the city, I knew that this was just the beginning. There would be challenges ahead, confrontations with my family, decisions to be made, but I was ready. I had the strength to face whatever came next. And the most important part? I had control. I was no longer just a pawn in their game. I was the one who controlled the moves.